Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart, the most listened to internet radio show in the nonprofit sector, dedicated to helping your charity succeed. It's no secret that combining online and offline techniques is the key to modern-day fundraising success, and practical advice is what you need. The Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart is the perfect landing point to learn from experts around the world who provide advice you can use. Ted Hart is without a doubt one of the foremost nonprofit thought leaders. Also a successful author, his books range from successful online fundraising to the use of social media and how to make your nonprofit green. Guests on the Nonprofit Coach are leaders in their field who share tips and trade secrets for nonprofit management and fundraising success. Ted lectures around the world, but now he's here for you. From the latest in charity news, technology, fundraising, and social networking, Ted and his guests help you and your organization move to greater levels of efficiency and fundraising success. This is a live call-in show. Add your voice by calling 347-324-3080. After the show, you can find all our podcasts at tedhart.com. Click on Radio. Don't forget to dial 347-324-3080. Now, welcome the host of the Nonprofit Coach, Ted Hart.
And welcome to this latest edition of the Nonprofit Coach. We are here live, and today is the day. Today is June 16th, 2015. This is one of the biggest days of the year here on the Nonprofit Coach. The Giving Institute has, since the beginning of this show, chosen to use the the Nonprofit Coach radio show as one of its main outlets for information regarding the release today of the GivingUSA report. This is a seminal report on giving throughout the United States, and with us here today we have two experts. We have Keith Curtis, who is the chair of the GivingUSA Foundation, and Peter Fissinger, who is the past chair of that same board. Because of the importance of this topic and the information that these two gentlemen have for us today, we are going to jump right into the show and get right on to page 2. Leading us off today is Keith Curtis. As I mentioned before, he's chair of the GivingUSA Foundation. He's founder and president of the Curtis Group. For more than 30 years, he has been experienced in working on behalf of philanthropic organizations. Over that time, Keith has become recognized as an expert in all aspects of fundraising and nonprofit management. He is also sought after as an advisor and speaker, making up to 40 presentations a year. I don't think he sleeps. To a variety of national and state conferences. As president of the Curtis Group, founded 26 years ago, Keith and his team have developed strategies to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for their clients. But more importantly, he is here. He's been actively involved with the GivingUSA Foundation, where he currently serves as chair. He's the past chair of its advisory council on methodology. So a very important gentleman, and an honor to welcome him here to the Nonprofit Coach. Hello, Keith Curtis.
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me, and I'm thrilled to have Peter Fissinger along with us today also.
We're gonna bring Peter in just a few seconds, but because this is such a momentous day, and because you're currently chair of this important board, I'm going to ask you to start off by just a brief description of what is the Giving Institute, what is the GivingUSA report, and then let's not hold people in suspense. What are the numbers and what happened? So take it away.
Sure, and as you mentioned, this is a big day. It's a big day for philanthropy, and we appreciate you helping to get this word out. I'll talk a little bit about what GivingUSA Foundation is, so we'll hold everybody in suspense for just a second. GivingUSA Foundation is the sort of sister organization of the Giving Institute. It was founded by Giving Institute. We work with our nonprofit. We work with lots of nonprofit organizations, and we partner with our research partner on this, Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. As you mentioned, this is a long-term report. This is our 60th year. And the great thing about not only celebrating our 60th year is we're also celebrating reaching an all-time high over those 60 years in giving in this country. Over $358 billion was given last year, and that so we now have a high peak. And also the great news as part of that is we've got 5 straight years of increases in giving as we've come out of the Great Recession. So what we do know is that Americans continue to give, but the improved economy has allowed them to give more, and they've stepped up, and they've supported many nonprofit organizations.
Well, that's sounding like you've got good news to share.
Yes, it's definitely good news. And I think as you look at it, and Peter will probably talk about this in just a minute, he'll talk some about where the money went, but maybe I'll just take a couple of seconds to also talk about where the money came from. One of the great things that we know, some people have seen that iconic pie chart, is that where money is coming from. Individuals continue to still be the juggernaut of giving. Over 72% of the amount raised in this country is coming from individuals, about 15% from foundations, 8% from bequest, and just about 5% from corporate giving. The piece, though, to keep in mind is that if you really take the private family foundations that are part of foundation giving and you take the bequest, what we realize is that 87% of the dollars donated in this country are coming from individuals. So really good news.
87%. That's a very big percentage. How much is the total giving in the United States for 2014? That's the big news,
if you look at if you look at the total giving, we're looking at about $358 billion. But then if you take in some of these other pieces that I had talked about, just individual giving alone is around $300 billion of that by the time you take in the individuals, their family foundations, and bequests. So really exciting. And keeping in mind, last year, basically as we've looked at this, well, not last year, but pre-recession high, we were at about $355 billion. And then just one other quick thing, when we started this 60 years ago, if you did what was given in this first year of this report back in 1955 and adjusted it for inflation, at that point it was $63 billion. So we've seen phenomenal growth over the last 60 years.
Well, 60 years is an enormous body of work. I do want to bring Peter Fissinger into the conversation now. Peter Fissinger is a president and chief executive officer. He is, through 30 years plus career in institutional advancement, he has designed and implemented major capital fundraising, annual giving programs, planned giving programs, marketing, and publication efforts. He's committed to creating effective and successful campaigns through his work as President and Chief Executive Officer at Campbell Company. Welcome back here to the nonprofit coach, Peter Fissinger. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me today, Ted. I appreciate it.
Well, Peter, you've not been at the Giving Institute for all 60 years, but you've been involved for quite a long time. This is a labor of love for a lot of people, but more importantly, it paints the picture of philanthropy in the United States, not just for 1 year, but over, as was mentioned earlier by Keith Curtis, over 60 years. What is the story of American philanthropy?
Well, it's a very interesting story. I like to believe that giving to religion was the birthplace of philanthropy in this country, where people would go to worship at church or synagogue every week and be asked to support their house of worship as well as other basic human needs when these organizations were doing mission-related work. And from there, over the 60 years, what we've seen is all different kinds of philanthropy growing. To be honest, religion's piece of the pie has shrunk over time, but mostly because other categories were growing faster than giving to religion. So, it's really a unique thing in our country, and it's really encouraging to see the strong returns over the last 5 years, and to reach the highest level ever adjusted for inflation in this past year, according to the estimates.
Well, and you mentioned that there has been a shift in what has been counted as religion. I'm just wondering if part of that story is the diversification of services that might have in the past been categorized under religion may now have shifted into social service organizations and others, and if this is more of a definition than an intent.
Well, I don't think, as I understand the data, that is the case, Ted, because giving to religion has always encompassed a lot of human service work that these worthwhile organizations do. We believe that the drop as a percentage of the whole, and frankly, some drop in real dollars over the past 5 years, is attributed to the fact that fewer Americans are directly affiliated with a church or synagogue than at any point in history. And it's really a matter of, if you think about how volunteers tend to give, or those who are involved in organizations tend to give, the history has been that people have gone to church or synagogue every single week and been asked to give, and they're part of a community. And without editorializing on why that might be, it appears that the statistics suggest that fewer people do go to church or synagogue every week, and therefore giving in that category has flattened over time.
Okay, so what is social service related to religion has been counted and continues to be counted in religion. So I think that, that sort of, maybe confusion brings us to, let's talk about the methodology before we sort of get into, peeling back the onion in terms of where the money is going and where those internal stories are. But how do you and how have you, and this is for both of you, created this seminal, most important report about philanthropy in the United States? How does all that data come together and then get into this report?
Keith, you want to take
Peter?
that? Or?
No, go ahead, Peter. I'll let you start off.
Well, first of all, we've in recent years, we have, as an institute, engaged with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, which is a leading academic center focused on philanthropy in this country. They use what's called an econometric model, which they have access to a wide range of economic data, and they're able to model over history what indicators are most influential in determining philanthropic results. So the number that we're sharing with you today, $358 billion, is actually an econometric estimate, which will be confirmed in 2 subsequent years as more data becomes available. This model has an accuracy of well above 97, 98, 99% over history, but it might modify or change a little bit in the coming 2 years. The economic indicators that are most commonly associated with giving overall are personal consumption, which increased 3.9% last year, the S&P 500, which increased 11.4% last year, personal income, which increased 4% last year, the gross domestic product, which increased 3.9% last year, and then pre-tax corporate profits, which increased 8.3% last year. All those indicators are positive, and this model also has significant access to IRS data. And frankly, Keith and I have both served as chair of the Council on Methodology, where as practitioners, we're the only non-academicians on the group, and it's quite a complicated process, but we've found that our practitioner and market knowledge has been very useful to the academicians as they refine the research model, and it's been highly successful over the 60 years that we've been doing this work.
And I think, Ted, the only piece to add on to that, thanks, Peter, for that great definition there and description. But as Peter talks about that council and methodology, everything that we're doing and what we've done really over these 60 years is there's about 700 different variables. This is all peer-reviewed, and it's actually a really exciting process. So while Indiana University's Lilly Family School is pulling this together, they're doing it with lots of input from a lot of people to really determine, where the money is coming from and then where that money is going. And again, to touch on that accuracy piece, it's really amazing just how accurate this information is, especially when you think of other, economists on other things around our country, how off they can be on things, that for 60 years, how within as Peter said, within 97, 98, 99%, we have this piece down.
So how do you size up the this is growth. This is it's true. This is the highest reported amount of total giving in the history of the United States. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, it is.
But yet the percentage of giving to GNP, I believe, has not changed appreciably over time. What do we make of that? Is there anything in the data that helps us understand that point?
Well, I would say, first of all, when you say it hasn't changed appreciably, I guess I have to admit that that's largely true. It's ranged between 1.7% and 2.1% in the 60-year history of the research. It did hit 2.1% this year for the third time in 60 years, and so it is at the high water mark. But you make a really good point, Ted. I was at a conference in Chicago this morning, and the CEO of the Chicago Community Trust was presiding over this meeting where I presented some data, and they're making a big push in the community to have Chicago be the most generous community in the country, and that's very Chicago-centric. But he made a comment that I think is important. Is the real goal is to encourage people to be more generous, and I think we as professional fundraisers have an important role in that, to represent the missions of the organizations we serve, to engage meaningfully with donors, and to behave professionally and ethically to make sure that the investments they make have impact on the things that they care about. And I think that spurs positive publicity rather than some of the negative publicity that we sometimes hear in the media. And over time, we believe that if we were able to move the needle, say to 2.5% or 3% of the GDP, that it would be the single most important statistic in all of this data. I'm sure Keith agrees with that.
Yeah. And Peter, what's really interesting is, when we talk about that we've been at this 2% of GDP, right now GDP equals about 17. Where we are with if we just moved 0.1% on GDP, we would add over $17 billion because GDP right now is at about $17.4 trillion. So as Peter talked about, if we got to 2.5%, all of a sudden we'd be talking about $435 billion. So it doesn't take if we can move those small percentages, it would make a tremendous impact. And Peter, his point, I think, is right on. It's really not just up to the donors to be the ones to decide, that I've got to give. We have to be out there talking to them and what their gift and their charitable contribution will do and the impact that it will have. And that's very important for nonprofit organizations to be out there talking to their donors and just letting them know what that little bit more could do for the organization and for philanthropy in general.
And, Ted, if I could say, that market of donors is changing. In this data, there's $6.2 billion given by those who made what we're calling mega gifts, $200 million of more. And of that total, $6.2 billion, 85% of it came from the tech industry, which is a relatively new industry in our economy. And those donors are very different than donors of prior generations. And so we have opportunity, but we also have to be willing to change and evolve and adapt to the situation.
Let me just share with you, as you probably are aware, my organization that I serve as CEO of CAP America issues each year the World Giving Index, and in the most recent edition of the World Giving Index, the United States shared the first place ranking with Myanmar, and there's different, and religion plays a very big role in Myanmar doing as well as it does in the World Giving Index. And the World Giving Index is made up of the propensity of helping a stranger, which the U.S. came in number 1 in the world, volunteering time, of which the U.S. came in 5th, and donating money, of which the U.S. came in 9th. So the United States is the only country that ranked in the top 10 in all 3 categories of the World Giving Index. So the point that you're making is that the total amount, very exciting, a record number of amount given in the United States, still hovering in that historic range of 1.7 to 2.1% of GNP. And so I think rightfully you start pushing the point that we need to make that pie larger, because each year we report on the fact that, okay, maybe more is given and it gets divided up in different ways, but it's still representing the same amount of our total economy. Yet the United States, and this is why I'm marrying these 2 reports together, is yet the United States is the most generous in the world. So how do we get the most generous economy and society on this planet to give more?
Peter, I'll let you take that one.
Well, I pointed out the $6.2 billion given as part of that mega gift total, 85% of it coming from the tech industry. And for those of us who have been doing this work for a long time, and Keith and I both fit in that category, I think you do as well, Ted, I can remember just 10 or 15 years ago people being frustrated in talking about how these younger donors simply don't understand and don't want to give. And I've never believed that to be true. And I'm really encouraged by that statistic, not just because of the really big gifts that a few people are making, but the enduring truth that every generation in history has been philanthropic. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure we have figured out how to grow philanthropy to 2.5% of the GDP, because if we had, we'd have done it by now. But what I do want to encourage is, again, the strong practices that fundraisers can implement in working for their organizations and reaching out to donors and being able to articulate what it is that their mission does, being able to report back to donors who have given about the impact of their giving, to being able to measure impact in some reasonable way. And I'm not talking about arduous reporting that small nonprofits are unable to do. I'm really talking about building meaningful relationships and to encourage folks that what they're doing is making a difference. And there are other trends that I've been interested by. The sort of mechanical giving that you see at point of purchase in around the country. When I first experienced that, I was a little discouraged by it. But then I began to see that it's really a great way for broad-based giving that doesn't take away from other giving that people do, and it raises awareness. And you just see a lot of people, individuals, organizations raising awareness about philanthropy. And I really think that we all have a role in trying to both make sure that philanthropy is perceived positively, that the right regulations are in place so that it can be perceived positively, and that we continue to behave responsibly and ethically to serve donors well. And I believe that that's going to have an impact. But in fact, we have not been able to move to 2.5% of the GDP. So I can't stand here and claim that I have the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think, to build on Peter's piece, it really is about creating an awareness. So I think what we do with GivingUSA and having the opportunity to share that story, for instance, with you and your audience, it gets people thinking about it. The other is to Peter's piece is that by connecting with donors and talking to them about impact, it's amazing when we do that, the organizations that do that with their donors, all of a sudden their donors start to talk about philanthropy and their giving as fun, because they realize they're really making a difference. And so I think to some degree what we do have to watch is not always think that giving is a transaction, that it is something, it's very relationship focused, and really developing those relationships with people and building it. And that's what's going to help us grow this. Granted, the economy is a very important piece in this, but in order to grow it more than the 2%, we're going to really need people kind of coming together and understanding what this sector that is about 10% of GDP, give or take, really means, and that they're having, a world of influence. I sometimes talk to people and say, in most years, you got more people giving to charities than are voting. Philanthropy, we're raising more money for nonprofit organizations than we are for politicians when they're running, and people are like, wow, I never knew that. And so sometimes people just don't realize the impact and the depth and breadth of the philanthropic sector that's out there, and we just need to make sure they know it.
I'm wondering if this 60-year story that you're telling is a story of, yes, we can tell by the World Giving Index, the U.S. Is the most generous society on the planet, but because the evidence seems to suggest that philanthropy plays a certain role, and it seems to be a consistent role, and only when the economy grows do the absolute dollars grow, but the interest, act, and support of philanthropy has, by and large, remained consistent for the 60 years of this report.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. 63 million people volunteered at a nonprofit organization of their choice last year, and I think that's, pretty considerable, given how busy and complicated lives have become with more and more single-parent families in this country. And so I really do think there's a very positive spirit. And one of the things that I would encourage all organizations to do is to double down on their focus on engaging volunteers in a meaningful way. And I don't just mean volunteer fundraisers. I have a very simple story in our household where my wife started volunteering at our local food bank, and she's there as we speak. In fact, she goes once a week on Tuesday afternoons, and as a result of that engagement, I've started to go to their events, and we've started to give more and more to that local entity. And, I really encourage all of those who are involved in nonprofit organizations to continue to think of ways to engage volunteers meaningfully, because I think it's an important piece to building the philanthropic total in this country.
What do you think about this notion of philanthropy? I'm not going to call it a ceiling. I think it's so personal that it's not necessarily viewed by most people as sort of a national engagement. We're reporting it that way. Certainly, 60 years of history seems to point to these are individual, very private decisions that add up to about the same every year.
Yeah, I think, what we find is that, again, as that percentage of GDP, it does stay about the same, but again, it is increasing every year dollar-wise.
Sure.
And I think as big as GDP is, one thing we have to keep in mind, as I mentioned, you just move it, 0.1%, you've just added $17 billion on. So it doesn't take a lot of movement. I think, Americans, as you've talked about, they're incredibly generous. Peter talked about the millions and millions that are volunteering. And, what we also know is that about 2/3 of households are making, a charitable gift. And if you really look at high net worth households, that's, over 95%. So I think it's really ingrained in Americans, but I do think they still, and I guess the definition, and it would be interesting to get Peter's take on this, I think sometimes what we have to do is talk to people about their charitable dollars as you're not just giving to a charity, you're really making that difference in your community and just a little bit more, and that depends on whether you're the $100 donor or you are the million plus donor. By really understanding the impact that you can have and engaging people, that possibly can move the needle. On a smaller scale, we saw that some with, something as simple as the ALS challenge. They raised a lot of money because they started engaging people and they made it fun. I'm not suggesting that's how all of philanthropy can be, people pouring, ice buckets over their head. But again, I think for a lot of donors, it's got to be more than just, stroking that end of the year check. And that goes back to that point Peter was making.
I just wanted to respond to that because I think you brought up a very important point. The ALS challenge, I think it, represents more of sort of a lightning in a bottle approach rather than, a strategy, because most organizations are not going to do that. It's very rare that
Correct.
we see something that is philanthropic that sweeps the nation. And I'm just suggesting, and I don't want to stay on this topic because we do want to move on to some of the other data in the actual report, but because you folks, both of you gentlemen are really very knowledgeable in this area, I just wanted to explore this notion that I've been thinking year after year, and now that you're in your 60th year, is this a report of, the fact that this is where philanthropy fits in the U.S. Psyche, and that it is not a national endeavor. People don't give because they're giving as part of a national move the needle, but they're giving in very small ways and very individual decisions, whether it's to their church or to their local food bank. It's all those individual decisions that they're not thinking in terms of if I give 500 instead of 100, I'm now contributing to moving the needle.
I think you're right. I don't think that the average donor thinks, geez, I have to move that needle, and whether or not we should try to raise those sites for everybody across the country is probably an interesting debate that would take more time than we have today. But what I do think, Ted, is that, and I think that Keith and I both stress this a lot in the work that we do, that those who work in the sector can really make a difference with well-intended donors. I'll give you an example. This morning at this conference that I was at, there was a wide discussion on a lot of topics, and somebody asked the question, are we ever going to stop having these galas that become increasingly expensive and are time-consuming? And there's a very interesting thing. One of the panelists said, I go to a lot of these galas as part of what I do, and there are a few that I really care about. One, this woman pointed out this human rights organization that does a great job with their gala, and she said there's two things that they do. One is that every year they bring some speakers who are advocates for human rights or have benefited from the work that the organization has done. So the people who come learn something, and they get to touch and feel, kind of the work of the organization. She said the second thing is they do their program very well, very succinctly, and everybody is, they were talking about HBT, horizontal by 10, so that, you're organizing your program in an efficient way where donors learn something and you're not keeping them out until midnight. That might seem like a very minor thing, but if we can replicate best practices across the sector, I really do believe that donors will see the connection between their giving and the impact and be encouraged to give more. And that's the work that we do every day.
That's great. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to just hold right there. We're going to take a very brief break, and when we come back, I really want to peel that onion back just a little bit more and have you share with us who are the big winners, what sectors, where did the money go, now that we know and have unveiled here on the Nonprofit Coach that giving is at an all-time high, surpassing $358 million or $1 billion here in the United States. And we will be right back after this break.
Have you ever wished you could take back an email you sent to the wrong person? Or have that nagging feeling that your confidential message was forwarded without your consent? Do you sometimes email sensitive data even though you know most email isn't secure? And we all have, because we're busy, and because in the world of email, there are no takebacks. Until now. Introducing Virtru, the simple way to send and receive secure email with confidence. Virtru is easy to install and use, and it works with your favorite email programs like Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, MacMail, and more. When you hit the Send Secure button, your email is encrypted before it leaves your computer or smartphone. And even better, you can revoke a message at any time. You decide whether a message can be forwarded by recipients. You can track where your message is forwarded, and more. Download Virtru today and start sharing with confidence, because everyone deserves digital privacy and security without hassle.
Remember, our podcasts and archives are always available 24 hours a day at tedhart.com. Click on radio links. If you're listening live today, the phone lines are open. Call in and ask a question by dialing 347-324-3080. Now, back to the Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart.
And just a program notice, please get out your calendars. We are beginning to wind down for the first half of this year. The final live show here of the Nonprofit Coach here in June will be on June 30th, live at 12 noon Eastern with Linda Lysakowski, who is the author of Asking Styles, second edition by Charity Channel Press. She will then send us into our summer break, and we will then come back live after the summer break in September. So watch your Twitter and watch your email. You can, of course, register for our newsletter at tedhart.com and sign up for our Twitter account where we announce everything, and that's twitter.com/TedHart or just at Ted Hart. And we are back here live on the Nonprofit Coach. And gentlemen, if you could walk us through what's in the data, where did the money go?
Okay, Peter, you want me to start on that?
Sure.
Okay. So we track the 9 different categories of sectors, and so when you look at that $358.38 billion that was given, as we talked earlier, the big piece of it ends up going to religion. And then after that, and that's about 32%, education gets about 15%, human services about 12%, and then we can talk a little bit more about some of them as we go through. 8 of those 9 recipient sectors that we track were all up, and 6 of them have reached all-time highs. So the only one that was down this past year was international giving, but other than that, the other 8 were up, and again, 6 of those had reached all-time highs.
Just to build on that a little bit, you said, I think, Ted, you used the word who were the winners. The sectors that saw the greatest growth as a percentage over the last 2 years combined are education over a 2-year period, 13.2% increase. Health, 11.8%. What we call public society benefit, which is the United Way's and the Jewish Federations of the world, as well as the Fidelity donor advised funds at 12%, arts, culture, and humanities 13%, and environment and animals at 12.4%. I think if you look at those sectors that I just outlined, to be perfectly candid, they are the sectors that tend to do the best with individual donors, excepting perhaps the public society benefit, which is it's a very complicated category. We can talk more about it if you want. But those other sectors tend to do especially well when the stock market is strong, because they have support from high net worth individuals who want to make a difference in that sector and sometimes wait until their asset bases are at a very high valuation and then make really big gifts. And so those are right now the sectors that are doing the best in terms of percentage increases over a 2-year period.
You brought up donor-advised funds, and I earlier today attended at the Urban Institute their discussion today, which had the presidents and CEOs of all the top donor-advised funds, including myself at Cap America, Fidelity, Vanguard, Charles Schwab, MPT, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, all of us there at the Urban Institute today on the discussion of donor-advised funds. How have they changed philanthropy? And one of the questions that came up that no one in the room had any information on, so you can share the answer to the question here on the Nonprofit Coach, is how are donor-advised funds accounted for in the GivingUSA report?
They actually show up in 2 different categories. If you look in the foundation category, one piece of the foundation category is community foundations. And community foundations across the country have been very aggressive in building their donor-advised fund categories and capacity to serve donors. The second piece is the for-profit entities of which Fidelity is perhaps best known, but there are many others, and that's counted in the public society benefit. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a problem. We'd like to create a separate category for donor-advised funds. We're working on that. When I say we're talking about GivingUSA, and having been chair of the Methodology Council, I know that it's just a complicated challenge to get all of that categorical giving in one place. We're working on it.
And I think we have we've seen such a big growth over the last few years on those donor-advised funds, both within the community foundations and those freestanding commercial funds, like the Fidelity and the Schwab. And it's really interesting as you're seeing it, depending on a year, if you combine them, they could be counting, granted not a huge percentage, but, they could be accounting for somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe about 4%, of all giving. And they're probably, as their assets continue to build, they're going to play a bigger role. And we're starting to see, a number of folks. It's not just it's not the old way of the private family foundation where you just have to have big donors do this. A lot of these you may be able to get in for $5,000 or $10,000 and have a fund and really be able to distribute. So we are seeing a lot of things happening there with those donor-advised funds.
Well, the statistics that we're given today is that there are 43 national-sponsored donor-advised funds, again, like Cap America, Fidelity, Vanguard, of a national variety. And then there are 606 community foundations and then 363 donor-advised funds that are categorized as single-issue charities. So a total of 1,012 organizations that took in $17.28 billion in the last report, and granted during that period about $10 billion, which was a 50% increase in money going out of donor-advised funds in the past 7 years. So definitely a big story, and I think a story that oftentimes charities don't understand that money's already been donated and is available if you have a relationship with a donor who has a donor-advised fund. I think a lot of charities put sort of a big question mark over that donor, and they actually should be dancing a jig because if they have that kind of relationship, I think it's a far easier sell to get a donor to make a donation, to advise a gift to your charity if they have a donor-advised fund than if they're looking at pulling cash out of their checking account or stocks out of their portfolio. I just think that's a tougher decision, and that's where most charities spend their time. And I just wanted to ask you to reflect in, what might that do if charities really began instituting a very serious approach to having donors who have donor-advised funds advised to them.
I was talking to somebody today, and then Peter, I'll let you jump in. I was actually having this conversation with somebody today that, oftentimes they would get, because a lot of the growth is so new that a lot of nonprofits don't know how to handle it, and that what people were doing is they would get in the nonprofit, they would get in this check, and it would come from a Fidelity or Schwab or even a community foundation, wherever. And, they weren't really thinking this was the donor. They were tying it to the organization more so, like the Fidelity, and they didn't think to cultivate them. And, what we were talking about is when those donors have those donor-advised funds, they have told you they have an intent to give. Because that's what those funds exist for.
And in fact, they've already given. They put it into an account where all they have to do is advise it. It's one of the simplest decisions for a donor to make.
And so nonprofits need to realize that when they're getting those, they really need to work hard at continuing to engage that donor, because there's a good chance they will give again.
I mentioned earlier that sometimes and I'm referring to this profession of which I'm part, the fundraising profession, that we are perhaps a little too slow to change our behaviors, our habits, to recognize opportunity. I was at a GivingUSA live presentation a year or two ago and was really surprised to hear a question from the audience asking me what I thought of the fact that people are given a charitable deduction for moving money from their own assets into another managed asset where they can let it sit indefinitely. And the clear implication was, did I think that was a bad thing? And my response was, here is money that's being moved into an account where it can only be used for philanthropy forever. So whether it sits for a year or two, or in the bigger scheme of things, is a little bit beside the point. And the positive side of this is, if people continue to do this and they amass money, then they're going to have to start thinking with their kids about, where do we want to give this money? Now you're passing generational habits on to your children regarding philanthropy. And there's another thing about these donor-advised funds that have kind of irritated fundraisers, at least the ones that sit in community foundations. If I understand correctly, a donor can't make a 3 or 5 year pledge in the same way that he or she can if it's sitting in their own private foundation or in their own assets.
That is, I can just share with you, there is a restriction that donor-advised funds cannot be used to settle a pledge.
And so that irritates the devil out of fundraisers, But in fact, what these donors can do is there are ways for donors to say, I would like to pledge that I will make available X amount of dollars contingent upon being able to access and direct the funds annually. I mean, there are ways of getting around it, but But the point is that sometimes people in our profession just don't recognize opportunity because it's inconvenient, and I think this has been a very positive evolution, and we have to evolve with the opportunity to make philanthropic dollars available to the organizations that we're involved with.
Well, and I think the reason why that's important is that donor-advised funds have grown tremendously, and there's only one reason that donor-advised funds have grown tremendously, and that is because philanthropists, donors, like them. There's nobody out there forcing them to put money in donor-advised funds. They find them to be a very convenient way to be thoughtful and planful about their philanthropy, to have all their record-keeping in one place, and to have professional advisors available to assist them. So I think there's a story behind the story here in terms of, over the 60 years, philanthropy has changed. The United Way at one time was a much bigger player in where the money went and deciding, what got supported. Now the Internet plays a very important role. Donor-advised funds are playing a very important role. But at the heart of it is still the charitable organization and the charitable intent. And while the tools change, I think particularly professionals that are running charitable organizations need to understand that from my perspective, and I just shared this comment in the AFP magazine's article on donor-advised funds that I think is coming out for the summer edition. And my point of view is that donor-advised funds are one of the best news stories for fundraisers because if you've got a donor, a prospect who has a donor-advised fund, it's easier for them to make a decision to advise money they've already given for philanthropic purposes. As you said, it can only go to charity. So when you have an advisor who is the gatekeeper for advising that money, you've got something far better than trying to convince someone to give in the first place. We've only got about 8-9 minutes left here on the show. These always go so fast, as you know, Peter, because there's just so much to talk about. But having experts like yourself on the show really gives us a lot to consider. Looking into your numbers, I'm just wondering, in one area or one segment of the nonprofit sector that has not always been seen as sort of a high-flying winner, and oftentimes for fundraisers has been one of the more difficult areas, is that of arts and culture and humanities, and yet they have the highest percentage increase in this particular report. What's the story behind the story of success for the arts?
Well, the firm at which I work, Campbell Company, funded some separate research also with the Lilly School about 8 or 9 years ago on the arts and culture donor. And it turns out that the arts and culture donor, as compared to the average donor, tends to be more highly educated, more wealthy, tends to live in urban areas, and tends to give to multiple entities. And they are passionate about arts and culture, but they're also responsible donors. So when the economy is really struggling, and the Great Recession was a great indication of this, there's anecdotal evidence that donor temporarily stops giving to arts and culture organizations or gives less and supports basic human needs. And then when the economy's strong, they're doing better in terms of their own financial wherewithal. Their assets are valued at a higher level. They jump in and make big gifts to organizations that they think are really important but may not be basic human needs. And so I'm not a bit surprised to see arts and culture in the double-digit growth that we see, because where we are in the economy fits exactly with where they do best. And that's not to say that they never do well otherwise, but there's clear trends here, and it's supported by some research that we were able to do on that particular donor type.
Well, certainly good news for that sector, which is one that in some reports has lagged behind, and I think oftentimes has more difficulty in down markets. Philanthropy seems to be more cyclical than I think we would like it to be. It goes down when the economy goes down, and the tough part for those in need is that they have greater needs during that period. Is that just like we were talking earlier about, 2% just seems to be the norm. That seems to be the case for the 60 years of this report as well, doesn't it?
In the sense of the
cyclical nature of philanthropy tending to lag behind the economy, but when the economy goes down, so does philanthropy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen is, and Peter touched on some of those key economic indicators early on, and especially when you look at the S&P 500, for instance, and you see things like, disposable personal income, all of those things have a huge bearing. Again, Americans are giving, but what really helps them drive that giving is those economic indicators. And so I think, one of the things, as we saw during the Great Recession, thankfully we did, the philanthropy giving did not follow exactly the economy, or we would have been down a lot more. But as the economy is recovering, philanthropy is too. We're much healthier. And I think if, we see, this is not from GivingUSA because we're not able to really predict that future, but I think from my perspective, as someone who's dealing with this every day, that, if we continue to see an economy that is growing, then we will probably see that giving in this country continues to grow.
Ted, there's an interesting story behind the fact that the economy does impact philanthropy, and that is, in our experience, and I'm sure Keith would agree with this, the organizations that run very sound, comprehensive programs of philanthropy that are donor-focused do better when the economy is struggling than other organizations. And there are simple reasons for that. One is that, in our experience, most donors who give to multiple organizations and give a fairly significant amount away every year relative to their own capacity tend to give, when they have to reduce their giving, they tend to give to fewer organizations before they give less to those organizations to which they are most attached. And so within that economic story, we see stories of organizations that, hopefully we've impacted by helping them behave professionally, who are either able to weather those storms better and serve their missions more effectively. I was at a GivingUSA presentation 5 years ago when we were in the heart of the recession, and one of the panelists said, we just happened to have the best year that we ever had. And everybody was saying, how did that happen? Well, the way it happened is they've always worked on a bequest program, a planned giving program, even though it doesn't have an immediate return, and they happen to have two very large bequests. He said, if you look at our annual giving, it's down just like everybody else's. But because we've always worked on planned giving, we happen to be very fortunate this year and to have these bequests come in. And so we encourage organizations, always work on a bequest program, always work on planned giving, even though it doesn't have immediate impact.
And that comes down to relationships and the fact that, as was mentioned earlier, 87% of every dollar given away to philanthropy in this country comes from individuals. Gentlemen, we are out of time. We are down to our last 90 seconds, so I'm just going to very quickly say goodbye and ask that one of you share with my listeners how they can get more information and where they can find the entire report.
That's you, Keith.
Thanks, Peter. And again, thank both of you and Ted for having Peter and I today. What they can do is go to GivingUSA.org. And there is an opportunity to either purchase some of the report or you can get the free highlights there. And we'll cover a lot of what we discussed today.
Gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough, first of all, to the Giving Institute for choosing the nonprofit coach each year. Peter Fissinger, Keith Curtis, thank you. We look forward to having you on the show next year. That is our show for today. The big GivingUSA report shows all-time record giving, $358 billion. We will see you next time here on the Nonprofit Coach.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Nonprofit Coach Radio Show with Ted Hart. Tell all your friends to check out our production schedule and download our iPod and iPad-friendly podcast at tedhart.com. Thanks for listening to The Nonprofit Coach.
Have you Googled yourself lately? Are there negative posts from an ex-employee or from a former client? Maybe an outdated news article? Search engines don't always get it right. But right or wrong, it's your reputation on the line. That's where Reputation Defender by Norton comes in. Take control with Reputation Defender. Their cutting-edge approaches help you to wipe away unwanted information in your search results. They also promote the good stuff. You can start by getting your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 800-811-4975 to speak to an expert.
Top reasons your career wants you to move to Ohio. So many amazing growth opportunities, high-paying jobs in technology, advanced manufacturing, engineering, life sciences, and more. You'll soar to new heights, just like the Wright brothers, John Glenn, even Neil Armstrong. Their careers all took off in Ohio, and yours can too. A job that can take you further, and a place you can't wait to come home to. Have it all in the heart of it all. Launch your search at callohiohome.com.